The staffing agency didn't mention sub-level assignments during the interview. They didn't mention a lot of things. I'm Noah Dela Cruz, and 6 months ago I was a senior RN at County General with commendations and a clean record, until I reported a physician's assistant for systematic medication diversion. The hospital thanked me privately and blacklisted me professionally. In healthcare, whistleblowers don't find work easily. References dry up. Interview callbacks stop. The mortgage doesn't care about your principles. So when the agency called about a psychiatric nursing position at St. Bray Medical Center, decent pay, night shift, immediate start, I didn't ask many questions. The recruiter spoke quickly, as though reading from a script she didn't quite believe. Specialized unit. Minimal documentation. Report to sub-level entrance East Wing. Someone will meet you. Don't discuss the assignment outside the facility. I should have pressed for details. I didn't. Desperation has a way of narrowing your focus to the next paycheck. St. Bray is one of those sprawling hospital complexes that grew through decades of additions, new wings grafted onto old bones, architectural styles clashing across generations. I arrived at 10:45 p.m. for the 11 o'clock shift. The main lobby was bright and familiar. Linoleum floors, tired families in waiting areas, the antiseptic smell that clings to every medical facility. But the East Wing corridor leading to the sub-level access grew progressively older, the lighting dimmer, the floor tiles dating back to what looked like the 70s. The elevator required a badge scan. Mine didn't work. I tried 3 times before noticing the small yellowed sign beside the doors. Sub-level E access, internal authorization only. There was an intercom button. I pressed it static, then a woman's voice, flat and professional. Name, Noah Dela Cruz. I'm the new RN night shift. A pause long enough that I wondered if the connection had dropped. Then, wait there. 5 minutes later, a man in scrubs emerged from the stairwell door beside the elevator, not from the elevator itself. He was maybe 40, Southeast Asian, with the exhausted eyes of someone who'd worked nights too long. His badge read Jace Psychiatric, but no last name, no ID number. They send you down alone? He asked, looking past me as though expecting someone else. Yeah, is that unusual? He shrugged, already moving back toward the stairwell. Come on, elevator's being weird this week. I followed him down 2 flights of concrete stairs that smelled faintly of machine oil and old paint. The walls were unmarked, the lighting institutional and cold. At the bottom, a heavy door with a wire glass window and a card reader that glowed red. Jace knocked 3 times, waited, then knocked once more. Something about the rhythm felt deliberate, rehearsed. The lock buzzed. He pulled the door open and gestured me through. Sub-level E looked nothing like the psych wards I'd worked. The corridor was wide and immaculately clean, floored in pale grey vinyl that seemed to absorb sound. Recessed lighting hummed quietly overhead, a constant low-frequency drone that I felt more than heard. The walls were institutional white, but without any of the usual signage. No room numbers, no unit placards, no fire evacuation maps. Every 20 feet, a frosted glass observation window glowed faintly from within, but I couldn't make out any details through the translucent panes. The nurses' station sat at a T-intersection, a circular desk surrounded by filing cabinets and medication carts that looked decades old. Metal, not plastic, with handwritten labels. 3 nurses and 2 techs were gathered there, clearly waiting for shift change. They watched me approach with the particular stillness of people who'd learned not to waste energy on curiosity. A woman in slate-colored scrubs stepped forward. Mid-50s, grey hair pulled back severely, eyes that catalogued me in 2 seconds and rendered judgment. Her badge, like Jace's, listed only a first name. Marta, charge nurse, Dela Cruz, she said. Not a question, yes, Noah Dela Cruz. You'll shadow tonight. Watch how we do things before you touch anything. Her voice was clipped, efficient. We run on paper here. No computers, no phones except the ward line. Medications are logged by hand. Patients are referred to by initials only. You'll understand why as you go. She turned to the other staff. Count off. They did mechanically, each stating a number. 5 total. Marta wrote 5 on a clipboard, then turned back to me. 6 now, she said, adding my number. Count is 6. Do you understand? I didn't, but I nodded. The day shift left without small talk, without the usual shift change banter. They filed past me toward the stairwell door, avoiding eye contact. As the last one passed, I noticed her badge was turned backward, the photo and name hidden against her scrubs. When the stairwell door closed behind them, the air pressure changed. My ears popped, a sudden pressure drop like descending in an aircraft. The lights dimmed fractionally, then returned to normal. Across from the nurses' station, the frosted observation window seemed to darken from within, as though something had moved close to the glass and blocked the light. Marta slid a folded index card across the desk toward me. "Read this. Keep it with you." "Follow it exactly." I unfolded the card. 2 lines typed on what looked like an old typewriter. "Do not answer the ward phone after 3 a.m. Keep the mirrors covered if the lights flicker." I looked up. "Is this serious?" Marta's expression didn't change. "You'll learn the rest by doing." She turned away, pulling a set of carbon copy medication sheets from a drawer. I wanted to ask more. What kind of unit was this? Why the secrecy? What these rules actually meant, but something about the quality of silence in the corridor made me hesitate. The question felt too loud in my head to speak aloud. Jace appeared beside me with a lukewarm cup of coffee in a foam cup. "Welcome to the hole," he said quietly. "It's easy once you stop asking why." I glanced down at the index card again, then slipped it into my breast pocket. Through the frosted glass of the nearest observation window, I thought I saw movement, a shadow shifting against the dim glow. But when I looked directly at it, everything was still. The hum in the walls continued, steady and low, like a machine breathing in the spaces between the rooms. Marta stamped my timesheet with a blank seal, no date, no signature, and placed it in a drawer that locked with an actual key. "First round starts at midnight," she said, without looking at me. "Stay close and watch everything. Don't improvise. Don't assume you know how things work down here." I wanted to believe this was some kind of hazing institutional humor at the new guy's expense. But as I stood there in that nameless corridor, surrounded by observation windows that showed nothing, listening to that constant mechanical hum, a small voice in the back of my mind, the part that had kept me alive through code blues and combative patience, whispered that I should take the index card very, very seriously. The shift had just begun, and already the ward felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Not dangerous exactly, just attentive, like the building itself was watching, waiting to see what I would do. The first 2 hours passed in a routine so mundane, it almost made me forget the strangeness of my arrival. Marta walked me through medication administration, crushed pills in applesauce cups, liquid suspensions measured in plastic cups, everything recorded on carbon copy forms with a ballpoint pen. No computer prompts, no barcode scanning, no digital signatures, just handwriting and timestamps. The patients were quiet. Too quiet, perhaps, but I'd worked enough psych wards to know that wasn't unusual for night shift. Most were in their rooms, visible through the frosted observation windows as vague shapes in beds. A few wandered the small common area, a windowless room with furniture that looked salvaged from a 1980s waiting room. They moved slowly, without agitation, occasionally looking up at us but never speaking. "Why initials only?" I asked Marta as we completed the midnight rounds. She didn't pause in her documentation. "Confidentiality. This is a holding unit for patients who don't clear standard intake. Complicated cases. People who can't be in the system yet. Can't be or won't be. Both." She closed the medication log and locked it in a drawer. "We stabilize them here, then they move upstairs when they're ready. Everything's temporary. That's why we don't use names." It made a kind of bureaucratic sense, the sort of logic that emerges from hospital administration trying to navigate HIPAA and liability. But it didn't explain the rules on the index card, or the way the day shift had fled without making eye contact. At 1:30 a.m., I was restocking the med cart when Jace joined me in the supply room. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching me with that tired, evaluating expression. "So you reported someone at your last job," he said. "Not a question." I paused, a bottle of lorazepam in my hand. "How did you—" "Marta does background. Real background. She knows why people end up here." He picked at a loose thread on his scrubs. "Most of us got nowhere else to go. Burned out, blacklisted, or just tired of pretending the system makes sense. And you, 10 years down here. Lost my KDC certification upstairs after I refused to falsify group attendance records." He smiled without humor. "Turns out honesty is a liability in healthcare. But down here, honesty's the only thing that works. You follow the rules exactly. You report what you see exactly, and you don't try to rationalize it. That's the job. Before I could respond, the ward phone rang. It was a landline on the desk, one of those old beige multi-line units with a coiled cord and a small LED screen for caller ID. The ring was harsh, mechanical, cutting through the low hum of the corridor. Jace straightened immediately, his expression changing. "What time is it?" I checked my watch. 2:57. The phone rang again. Jace stepped past me, moving quickly toward the nurse's station. I followed. Marta was already standing at the desk, staring at the phone but not reaching for it. The caller ID screen glowed. "Internal extension 0000, don't," Marta said, though I hadn't moved toward it. The phone rang a third time, then stopped. The silence afterward felt heavier than it should have. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. At exactly 3:01 a.m. the phone rang again. Same caller ID, 0000I. Looked at Marta, then at Jace. Both stood utterly still, watching the phone as if it were a live explosive. The index card in my pocket suddenly felt warm against my chest. Do not answer the ward phone after 3:00 a.m. But this was a hospital. Phone calls at night were routine. Emergency admissions, pharmacy questions, physician orders. Not answering a hospital line was a violation of protocol, potentially dangerous. A patient could be crashing somewhere. A family member could be calling with critical information. The phone rang a fourth time. I reached for it. "Noah," Jace started, but I'd already lifted the receiver. "Sub-level E." "This is Noah," a woman's voice, calm and administrative, perfectly neutral. "Confirm patient count for Wing D," I frowned. "This is Sub-level E. We don't have a Wing D." A pause, not the natural pause of conversation, but something else, like a recording buffering, a tape catching on worn sprockets. Then the voice repeated, identical in every phoneme, every breath. "Confirm patient count for Wing D." The hair on my arm stood up. It wasn't just the repetition, it was the exactness of it. Every vocal inflection identical, as though I were hearing a loop. "We don't have that information," I said carefully. The pause again, same length as before. Then, "Confirm patient," I hung up. The silence rushed back in, but it felt different now. Thicker. The lights overhead stuttered once, a brief dimming that lasted less than a second. In the reflection on the observation glass across from the desk, I saw myself standing there, phone still in hand. But the reflection moved a half-beat behind, like a video with desynced audio. I watched myself lower the phone in real time, and the reflection lowered it a fraction of a second later. Then the reflection caught up, and everything matched again. "Jesus," I whispered. Marta moved quickly, yanking open a drawer beneath the desk and pulling out a white sheet. She strode to the observation window and draped it over the glass, covering my reflection entirely. Her movements were practiced, efficient. She'd done this before. "You read the card," she said, turning to face me. Her voice was controlled, but I caught the edge beneath it. "Read it again." I pulled the index card from my pocket with a hand that wasn't quite steady. The typed lines seemed heavier now, weighted with meaning I was only beginning to understand. The ward phone remained silent. I checked my watch. 3:05 a.m. The lights had stabilized. The reflection in the glass, now hidden behind the white sheet, no longer worried me, but only because I couldn't see it. "What was that?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "A test," Marta said, returning to her seat. She picked up her pen and made a notation on the shift log, her handwriting tight and precise. "The ward tests new staff. Always has. You answered, so now it knows you're here. But you hung up, and that's what matters. What knows I'm here?" She didn't answer. Jace moved to the coffee pot, poured himself a cup with hands that trembled slightly. "It calls most nights," he said quietly. "Asking for counts, asking for names, asking for confirmations we can't give. After 3 a.m. the line doesn't go anywhere we want to reach." "That's not possible," I said. But the words felt hollow. I'd seen my reflection lag. I'd heard the voice loop with inhuman precision. "Yeah," Jace said, meeting my eyes. "It isn't. But you're going to see a lot of impossible things down here. The rules exist because people figured out how to survive them. Not how to explain them, just how to survive." I looked at the draped observation window, then at the phone, then at the index card still in my hand. My rational mind scrambled for explanations. Switchboard glitch, delayed VoIP connection, trick of exhaustion and fluorescent lighting. But the feeling in my gut, the one that had kept me alive through codes and crises, told me something else. The rules weren't a joke. They weren't hazing. They were a contract, written in the blood of whoever had learned them the hard way. I slipped the card back into my pocket and returned to the medication cart, trying to steady my breathing. Behind me, I heard Marta make another notation in the log, the scratch of pen on paper, loud in the unnatural quiet. The phone didn't ring again that night. But I felt it there, silent and waiting, like a mouth pressed against the receiver, listening for one of us to forget. The rest of that first shift passed without incident, unless you counted the way shadows seemed to pull too deeply in the corners of rooms, or how the constant hum in the walls occasionally syncopated in a way that made your teeth ache. Marta sent me home at 7 a.m., with a stamped timesheet and a single instruction. Be back tonight, 11 sharp. I slept poorly, my dreams full of ringing phones and mirrors that showed me doing things I hadn't done yet. By my third shift, I'd begun to learn the rhythms of sub-level E. The patients, patient K, patient A, patient M, and 6 others whose faces I was learning to recognize without names, followed routines that never varied. Morning meds at midnight. First rounds at 1 a.m., documentation between 2 and 3. The ward was quiet, controlled, almost peaceful if you ignored the wrongness humming beneath everything. Jace became my unofficial guide. Between medication passes and safety checks, he'd explain the unspoken protocols that Marta never bothered to articulate. It's a holding pen for people who don't clear intake, he told me during a break in the staff lounge, a windowless room with a microwave, a coffee maker, and furniture that looked salvaged from a thrift store. Psychotic breaks that don't match any diagnosis. Suicide attempts that shouldn't have been survivable. People who say things in triage that flag them for special observation. Special observation, I repeated. That's not a clinical term. Nothing down here is clinical. He stirred his coffee absently, the spoon clinking against ceramic. We stabilize them, keep them safe, and eventually they move upstairs. Most don't remember being here. That's probably a mercy. And the rules? His expression darkened. The rules are what keep us from joining them. He spoke about sub-level E with the resigned familiarity of someone who'd stopped questioning it. 10 years down here, he'd said. A decade of following protocols that made no medical sense, of recording observations that never went into any official record, of working in a unit that didn't appear on any hospital directory. Why stay? I asked. He shrugged. Where else would I go? I'm unhireable upstairs. Lost my certification, my references. This is it. Besides, he paused, choosing his words carefully. You get used to it. The weirdness becomes normal. You learn not to look too closely at things. But Jace's comfort with the abnormal, I was learning, had made him reckless. At 1:40 a.m. on my 5th shift, patient K began his nightly routine. He was a slight man, maybe 30, with dark hair and eyes that never quite focused on anything. Every night around this time, he'd leave his room and approach the observation window nearest the nurse's station. He'd stand there very close to the frosted glass and hum, tunelessly, arrhythmically, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his throat. Then he'd tap on the glass. 3 times, always 3 times, with the flat of his palm. The first few nights it had unnerved me, but Marta and Jace ignored it completely, so I'd learned to do the same. Tonight, though, something was different. Patient K tapped on the glass, and Jace, standing at the desk reviewing medication logs, tapped back. It was casual, almost playful. The kind of thing you'd do with a toddler, a moment of harmless connection. Jace even smiled, a rare expression on his exhausted face. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice. I stood immediately, my hand moving toward the drawer where Marta kept the spare sheets for covering mirrors. But Jace waved me off. It's fine, he said. It happens all the time. The card says, I know what the card says. His tone was patient but dismissive. Look, I've been here a decade. You learn what's actually dangerous and what's just superstition. A couple flickers aren't. He stopped. He was looking at his reflection in the observation glass, the frosted pane now acting as a dim mirror in the overhead lighting. I moved beside him and saw it too. Jace's reflection stood where it should, matching his posture. But for just a moment, less than a second, the reflection's smile was wrong. The angle of the head was wrong, tilted just slightly too far to the left, in a direction that human necks don't comfortably bend. Then it corrected, snapping back into alignment so quickly, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Jace went pale. He stepped back from the glass, his breathing suddenly shallow. "Did you—" "Yeah," I said quietly. "I saw it." He rubbed his eyes hard, the way you do when you're trying to reset your vision after staring at a screen too long. "It's fine. Just tired." "I'm just tired." But he wasn't fine. I could see it in the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept darting back to the glass and then away, afraid to look directly at his own reflection. At 2:15 a.m., Jace announced he was checking room 5, a single occupancy at the end of the east corridor. "Patient M requested water," he said, though I hadn't heard any such request. "Want me to come?" I asked. "Nah, just a minute." He grabbed a plastic pitcher and disappeared down the hallway. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I called his name down the corridor. No response. At 15 minutes, I walked down to room 5. The door was propped open with a shoe, a safety violation. Doors were supposed to be closed or fully open, never propped. The room was empty. Patient M's bed was made, the sheets military tight. The bathroom door stood ajar. I pushed it open slowly. The bathroom mirror, medicine cabinet, standard issue, was fogged with condensation, though the shower was dry and cold. Written backward in the fog, as though someone had traced the letters from the other side of the mirror, were 2 words: "Count is off, my pulse hammered in my throat." I backed out of the bathroom, out of the room, and called Jace's name again, louder this time. He appeared from around the corner of the west corridor, the wrong direction entirely, nowhere near room 5. He was sweating despite the cool air. His scrubs darkened at the collar. "Where the hell were you?" I demanded. "Supply closet. Looking for—" He paused, seeming to forget what he'd been looking for. "I was right there. Just checking stock. You said you were going to room 5. He blinked, confused. "I was. I went there first, but then I needed—" He trailed off, his expression clouding. I was just in the supply closet." I led him back to room 5, showed him the propped door, the empty room. He removed his shoe from the door jamb, staring at it as though it belonged to someone else. "I don't remember doing that," he said quietly. "And the mirror?" We looked into the bathroom together. The condensation was already fading, the words disappearing letter by letter as the moisture evaporated. But we'd both seen them. Jace wouldn't meet his reflection. He turned away from the medicine cabinet, keeping his eyes on the floor. "I'm done with mirrors," he muttered. "Fuck mirrors." We walked back to the nurse's station in silence. Marta was there, reviewing the shift log. She looked up, her gaze moving from me to Jace and back again. "Something happened. The lights flickered earlier," I said carefully. "We didn't cover the mirrors fast enough." Marta's jaw tightened. She set down her pen with deliberate care. "Did you interact with your reflection?" "I tapped on the glass," Jace admitted, his voice hollow. "When patient K tapped." "Reciprocation," Marta said, as though diagnosing a disease. She made a notation in the log, her handwriting sharp and precise. "You engaged it. Now it has a hook." "A hook?" I asked. She didn't elaborate. She simply pulled another index card from her desk drawer, this one more worn than mine, the edges soft with handling, and read aloud, "If your reflection deviates, do not acknowledge it. Do not engage. Turn away and ask a colleague to verify your position." She looked at Jace. "The next time you see yourself, have someone else look first. Don't trust what you see until it's confirmed." Jace nodded, but he looked shaken in a way I hadn't seen before. The exhaustion in his eyes had deepened into something closer to fear. The rest of the shift, he avoided every reflective surface, the observation windows, the glass on the medication cart, even the blank screen of the ward phone. He moved through the corridors with his eyes downcast, navigating from memory rather than sight, and I understood with cold clarity what Marta had meant during my first shift. The rules weren't suggestions. They weren't superstition. They were load-bearing. Remove one and something collapsed. Break one and something broke you back. After Jace's incident with the mirror, I stopped assuming anything about sub-level E was benign. The ward had rules because people who'd worked here before me, who'd tested boundaries and paid prices, had learned what happened when you broke them. And those lessons had been written down, passed on, refined through trial and horrible error. I wanted to understand. My entire career had been built on understanding pathophysiology, pharmacology, therapeutic interventions. Problems had causes. Effects had explanations. But sublevel E resisted explanation in a way that made my rational mind itch. So I started looking for answers in the only place they might exist. The paper trail. Medical facilities generate documentation constantly, incident reports, policy memos, maintenance logs, staff schedules. Even a unit as deliberately obscure as sublevel E had to leave traces. During my breaks, between medication passes and safety rounds, I began exploring. The staff lounge had a filing cabinet, locked but not particularly secure. I picked it open during a quiet stretch at 4 a.m., using a bent paperclip, a skill I'd learned from a particularly resourceful ER tech years ago. Inside, I found personnel files dating back decades, but they were incomplete. Pages removed, names redacted with black marker, employment dates that didn't align with the timelines written in the margins. Jace's file listed him as starting in 2013, but a handwritten note on the inside cover read, "Continuous service since 2003, prior records consolidated." Marta had no file at all, just a blank folder with her first name written on the tab in pencil. I found something else in the bottom drawer, old maintenance logs from the late 90s. Most were routine, HVAC repairs, electrical inspections, plumbing work, but one entry, dated October 1997, had been circled repeatedly in red pen, sublevel D decommissioned pending hazmat assessment. All patient transfers to sublevel E complete. Awaiting demolition clearance and sublevel D, the same designation the phone voice had mentioned, confirm patient count for wing D. I photographed the page with my phone, then kept digging. In a maintenance alcove near the east stairwell, behind a panel marked Electrical Authorized Personnel Only, I found a locked drawer built into the wall itself, as though it had been part of the original construction. The lock was old, a simple pin tumbler. It took me 3 tries, but it opened. Inside, decommissioned ward maps. They were architectural blueprints, yellowed and brittle, dated 1982. The layout showed 2 sublevels, sublevel D and sublevel E, both psychiatric holding units, connected by a central corridor. Sublevel D was larger, with more rooms, a larger commons area, and notations about enhanced security features and isolation protocols. But someone had taken a thick black marker and crossed out every reference to sublevel D. The entire section was blacked out, rendered invisible, with a stamp across the top in faded red ink. Hazmat renovation pending. 03/12/1998 pending. For 27 years I turned the blueprint over. On the back, someone had written a list in pencil. The handwriting cramped and urgent. Addenda to operational rules. Sublevel EI if a census request comes from Wing D. Do not provide numbers. If a patient calls you by your last name while their chart only lists initials, step back and verify door seals. When lights flicker, count your team out loud. Do not stop until the lights stabilize. Do not accept transfers from D. No exceptions. Below that, in different handwriting, shakier, it doesn't forget names. It keeps them. Don't give it anything to hold. I photographed everything, then carefully replaced the maps and locked the drawer. My hands were shaking. Back in the staff lounge, I searched for more administrative records. Tucked into an old shift logbook from 2006, I found a photocopied memorandum on St. Bray Medical Center letterhead, 2 sublevel E staff, from Dr. Raymond Kellis, Director of Psychiatric Services, date 04/18/2006 ARI, Operational Protocols Sublevel, E is to interface with no external systems effective immediately. All EMR integration suspended. Census reporting to be handled internally only. The integrity of the separation must be maintained. Staff are reminded that discussions of unit operations outside of the designated area are grounds for immediate termination. These measures are non-negotiable and permanent. I searched for Dr. Raymond Kellis on my phone during break. The hospital's website listed no one by that name, not in current staff, not in the leadership archives. I tried LinkedIn, state medical licensing boards, obituaries, nothing. He'd been erased as thoroughly as sublevel D. The only fixed things in this place, I realized, were the routines. Medication passes at midnight, rounds at 1 a.m., documentation between 2 and 3. The structure of the shift was the only thing that made sense, the only thing that felt real. Everything else, the history, the explanations, the institutional memory, had been deliberately obscured, redacted, or destroyed. I brought my findings to Jace during a quiet moment at 5 a.m. We stood in the supply room, ostensibly doing inventory, while I showed him the photos on my phone. He studied the map of sub-level D, his expression unreadable. I heard stories when I started. Something happened down there in the 90s. Rare patient or maybe a staff member. Accounts vary. Whatever it was, they couldn't contain it. So they sealed the whole floor and rerouted everything through E. Sealed how? Concrete, I think. Welded the doors. Disconnected it from the hospital grid. He handed my phone back. But you can't really seal something like that. Not completely, it leaks. That's what the rules are for. Managing the leakage, and that's insane. Yeah, he agreed quietly. It is, but you've answered the phone. You've seen the mirrors. You're standing in a ward that doesn't exist on any hospital directory. Treating patients who have no charts. Getting paid from a budget line that nobody can trace. Insane's already in the rear view. He was right, of course. I'd crossed into that territory the moment I picked up the phone at 3:01 a.m. and heard that looping voice asking for a count from a floor that didn't exist. Why do you stay? I asked again because I still didn't understand. Jace was quiet for a long moment. Because if we don't, who will? These patients are real. They need care. And whatever's on the other side of those rules. He trailed off, then met my eyes. Someone has to stand between it and them. That's the job. That's all the job ever was. When I returned to the nurse's station, Marta was waiting. She glanced at my phone, still in my hand, and her expression hardened. Find anything interesting? She asked. I considered lying. Decided against it? Sub-level D, the 1998 decommission, Dr. Kellis's memo. She didn't seem surprised. And I want to know what we're actually dealing with. You're dealing with patients who need stabilization and a set of rules that keep everyone safe. That's all you need to know. She returned her attention to the medication log. Curiosity's fine, Noah, but it doesn't change what we do here. We follow protocols, we document observations, and we keep our heads down. That's how you survive. And if I want more than survival? She looked up, and for the first time I saw something other than professional detachment in her eyes. It might have been pity. Then you'll learn what everyone else learned, she said quietly, the hard way. She slid a thick, folded stack of papers across the desk, an expanded set of rules annotated in multiple hands, some sections written in margins, others taped in as addendums. The document looked like it had been compiled over years, maybe decades. Read it, Marta said. All of it. Because the ward's not done testing you yet. I took the papers, now heavy with implications I was only beginning to understand, and returned to my seat. The constant hum in the walls seemed louder tonight, or maybe I was just listening more carefully. Somewhere in the sealed corridors of sub-level D, something was waiting. And we in sub-level E were doing our best not to let it through. Patient A wasn't like the others. Most of the patients on sub-level E drifted through their days with a kind of medicated distance, present but not quite engaged. They followed routines, accepted medications, responded to basic questions with monosyllabic answers. Their charts, what little existed, listed diagnoses like acute psychotic episode, DOS or dissociative state etiology unknown. They were placeholders, human question marks waiting for resolution. But patient A was alert, oriented. She watched. Her full designation in the logs was simply A, no other identifiers. She appeared to be in her late 50s. Black, with neat silver-threaded braids and reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck. She wore the standard patient clothing, grey sweatpants and a white t-shirt, but somehow maintained a dignity that made it look like a deliberate choice rather than an institutional uniform. Every night, she sat in the common room from midnight until 6 a.m., positioned in the same chair, an ancient vinyl recliner near the corner, away from the observation windows. She never watched television, never paced, never displayed any of the restless energy that characterized most psychiatric patients during night shift. She just sat, hands folded in her lap, eyes open, waiting. At first I assumed she was catatonic or heavily medicated, but during my second week, when I did the 3 a.m. safety round, she spoke. "You're the new nurse," she said. Not a question. I paused in the doorway. "Yes, ma'am. Noah, can I get you anything?" "Sit with me a moment." It wasn't a request made with agitation or demand, just a simple invitation, the kind a grandmother might extend. I glanced back at the nurse's station. Marta was occupied with documentation. Jace was in the medroom. I had a few minutes. I sat in the chair across from her, maintaining professional distance but accepting the invitation. Patient A studied me with clear, intelligent eyes. "We've been reading the rules," she said. "How did you have the look." "Everyone gets it eventually, after they realize this place isn't what they thought." She adjusted her glasses, a small, precise movement. "You've answered the phone. You've seen the mirrors do things they shouldn't. Now you're trying to understand why." I chose my words carefully. "Have you been here long?" "Long enough to remember when there were 2 floors." Her voice was soft but certain, like someone recounting established history. "Sub-level D and sub-level E. We used to be one unit. Then something learned our names and it wouldn't give them back." The hair on my arms rose. "What do you mean, learned your names?" "Exactly what I said." She leaned forward slightly as though sharing something important. "There was a patient on D, or maybe it was a staff member. Stories vary, but someone broke protocol. Started using full names during documentation, probably thinking it was more humane, more personal. And something listened. It collected those names. Learned how to use them. Use them how? To call, to summon, to pull." Patient A folded her hands again, her expression grave. "When something knows your name, your real full name, it has a hook. It can mimic your voice, appear wearing your face, call to your colleagues using your authority." The staff on D realized too late. By then, people were hearing themselves in empty rooms, seeing themselves in places they weren't, receiving orders from supervisors who were off shift. I thought of the phone at 3:01 a.m., that perfectly looped voice, of Jace's reflection tilting its head wrong. So they sealed the floor. They tried. Concrete welded doors cut power, but you can't really seal something that doesn't exist in the physical architecture alone. So they erased D from the computers, from the records, removed it from the system, so the thing couldn't use institutional pathways to reach out. Isolated us here on E, and it worked? Patient A smiled sadly. "You've answered the phone. You tell me." I sat back, processing. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're asking the right questions. And that means you might survive long enough to matter." She reached into the pocket of her sweatpants and withdrew a small, folded piece of paper, contraband, technically. Patients weren't supposed to have anything that could be used for documentation. 2 more rules, unwritten but essential. She handed me the paper. I unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, careful. "If the corridor looks longer than you walked in, don't go the rest of the way. Turn around and ask someone to say your name. If you hear your own voice from the nurse's station, check the phone cradle. If it's warm, don't answer again. The corridor stretches." I asked, "when it's trying to disorient you." "Make you walk further into yourself, until you can't find the way back. But if someone speaks your name, your real name, from their lips, it anchors you. Reminds the ward that you're a person, not just a reflection." "And the warm phone cradle?" "Means something's been listening through the line, even when it's hung up." Breathing into the receiver. "Waiting for you to pick up again." She met my eyes. "Don't feed it counts or names, Noah. It fishes with numbers. It drags with titles. Give it nothing to hold on to." I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket alongside the index card. "How long have you been a patient here?" Her expression softened into something that might have been amusement. "I'm not a patient." "Not really. I just couldn't leave." She gestured to the common room, the corridor beyond. "I worked here once a long time ago. Before the ceiling. I was on shift the night D collapsed. I saw things I shouldn't have. Heard things I can't unhear. When they finally evacuated us, I couldn't reintegrate. The world outside felt wrong, thin, like I was only half there. So you stayed, so I came back. Checked myself in. Down here, the rules make sense. I know what I'm up against. Out there," she shook her head. "Out there, I was haunted by things I couldn't name or avoid. At least here we have protocols." I didn't know what to say to that. The idea of someone voluntarily returning to this place, of choosing the horror you knew over the uncertainty outside, was perhaps the most unsettling thing I'd encountered yet. "Why help me?" I asked finally. "Because you're honest. You reported problems at your last job even when it cost you. That kind of integrity is rare. She leaned back in her chair, settling into her vigil position. And because the ward has a way of testing new staff, harder than the old ones, it wants to know if you'll break, if you'll give it a way through. You need every advantage. I stood, preparing to return to the nurses' station. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You haven't passed the real test. Patient A closed her eyes, but I knew she wasn't sleeping. When it comes, and it will, remember, presence over names, numbers over identities, and never, ever answer something wearing your own face. I left her there, a woman who'd chosen to live in the space between worlds because everywhere else was worse. Back at the nurses' station, I added her 2 rules to my growing collection, writing them carefully in the margins of the expanded protocol packet Marta had given me. Jace noticed. Talking to Annika? Annika? I repeated. Patient A, that's her name. We're not supposed to use it, but everyone knows. He smiled slightly. She's been here longer than anyone. Knows more about this place than Marta does, probably. If she's giving you advice, take it. I looked back at the common room. Annika, patient A, sat perfectly still in her chair, a sentinel watching over a boundary she could no longer cross. And I understood, with cold certainty, that she was the ward's memory. The living archive of what happened when you forgot the rules or broke them, or simply weren't careful enough. She was a warning, and she was trying to keep me from becoming like her. It happened during my 4th week, on a Tuesday that felt like every other night until it wasn't. The shift had been routine, medication pass completed without incident, first round showing all patients stable and cooperative, documentation current. Jace was restocking the med cart. Marta was reviewing lab results that had come up. From the main hospital through the pneumatic tube system, one of the few physical connections, sub-level E maintained with the world above. At 2:50 a.m., the stairwell door buzzed. Marta's head snapped up immediately. We're not expecting a transfer. The door buzzed again, more insistent. Through the wire-reinforced glass, I could see a figure in scrubs or possibly transport staff whites, standing with a gurney. They weren't looking at the door. Their head was tilted down, face obscured. Marta stood slowly, her expression hardening into something I'd learned to recognize as extreme caution. Noah stepped back from the door. I did. Jace emerged from the med room, his eyes widening when he saw the figure at the door. Is that... he started. Don't, Marta cut him off. The door buzzed a 3rd time, then a 4th, the sound taking on an edge of urgency. The figure outside leaned forward, and now I could see the gurney more clearly. Someone was on it, a body shape under a white sheet, one arm hanging loose over the side, fingers dragging on the concrete floor. Marta approached the door, but didn't open it. She spoke through the reinforced glass, her voice projecting, "Identify yourself and state your business." The figure's head rose. It was wearing a surgical mask and a transport cap, the kind that covers all your hair. I couldn't see their face clearly, but something about the proportions seemed wrong. Eyes too far apart or maybe too close together, I couldn't tell which. "Transfer from D," the figure said. The voice was muffled by the mask but audible. "Overflow. Need immediate placement." "We don't accept transfers from D," Marta replied, her tone absolute. "Patient requires specialized monitoring. You're the designated placement." The figure pulled a clipboard from the gurney's side rail and held it up to the glass. I could see the paperwork from where I stood. A standard patient transfer form, but with critical fields left blank. No name, no medical record number, no attending physician's signature. Just checkboxes and a stamped header. Wing D overflow, admit to E, hold until census resolves. "No," Marta said flatly. "Return the patient to the referring unit. D is at capacity." "This patient requires..." "Return the patient." Marta's voice carried absolute authority, the kind that ends discussions. "We are not the accepting unit." The figure stood there holding the clipboard against the glass. The body on the gurney didn't move, but the hanging arm swayed slightly, fingers brushing the floor with a soft scraping sound. Then the ward phone rang. All 3 of us turned to stare at it. The caller ID glowed. Internal extension 00. It was 2:55 a.m., 5 minutes before the forbidden hour, but close enough that my stomach dropped. "Don't answer it," Jace said, his voice tight. The phone rang again. Marta looked from the phone to the door, her jaw set. The figure outside remained perfectly still, watching us through the glass. Third ring. I pulled the index card from my pocket, even though I had it memorized by now. Do not answer the ward phone after 3 a.m. We were still in the safe window, technically. Standard protocol would be to answer, but every instinct I'd developed over 4 weeks screamed at me not to. The phone rang a fourth time. Marta made her decision. She strode to the phone and lifted the receiver but didn't speak, just listened. Her expression went from cautious to rigid. After 10 seconds, she hung up without saying a word. What? I asked. Silence. Just breathing. She turned back to the door. That's not a real transfer. As if in response, the figure at the door reached up and pulled down the surgical mask. It was Jace. I looked at the man standing beside me. Jace, solid and present, his eyes wide with shock. Then back to the figure at the door. Same face, same exhausted eyes, same small scar above the left eyebrow where he'd told me he'd been hit by a patient years ago. The Jace at the door smiled. Come on, man. Help me out. This patient's heavy. The Jace beside me stepped back, his face draining of color. That's not me. That's not... I'm right here. The figure's smile widened just a fraction too far, the corners of his mouth extending past where they should have stopped. Noah, be reasonable. We've worked together. You know me. Just buzz me in. My hand moved toward the door release before I consciously decided to move. Some deep part of my brain, the part wired for social cooperation and helping colleagues, was responding to the face I recognized, the voice that sounded right. Marta grabbed my wrist. No, the ward phone rang again. 2:58 a.m. The thing wearing Jace's face pressed closer to the glass. The body on the gurney sat up suddenly, the white sheet falling away. The face was mine, my exact face, my hair, my build. But the eyes were closed and the mouth hung open. Slack and wrong. Confirm patient count for Wing D, my own body said, speaking with that same looping administrative voice from the phone. Confirm patient count. I felt reality tilt. This wasn't possible. I was standing here, I was present, I was real. But the body on the gurney wore my face, my ID badge, my specific brand of running shoes. The phone rang again. 2:59 a.m. The Jace thing put its hand on the door handle from outside, pushing even though the electronic lock was engaged. We have an incoming patient. You can't refuse. Hospital policy, Noah. You took an oath. Do no harm. And there it was. The hook I'd been trained on, the leverage that had driven my entire career. Do no harm. Don't turn away someone who needs help. A patient was on that gurney, real or not, and every fiber of my professional identity demanded that I provide care. Noah, Marta said quietly, that's not a patient. It's bait. The phone rang. 3:00 a.m. I looked at the caller ID, still 000. I thought of Annika's words. It fishes with numbers. It drags with titles. The thing on the gurney opened its eyes, my eyes, and looked directly at me. Son, it said, and the voice shifted, became my father's voice, my father who'd been dead 7 years, who'd been a paramedic and taught me that medicine was service. Son, be decent. Don't turn a sick person away, my chest constricted. Hearing my father's voice coming from my own face was a violation so profound I couldn't process it. Tears burned in my eyes. Noah, the voice continued, gentle and disappointed. What would I think of you turning away someone who needs help? My hand moved toward the door release again. Marta's grip tightened on my wrist, hard enough to hurt. That's not your father, she said, her voice cutting through the fog. And that's not a patient. Read your card. I fumbled for the index card, my hands shaking. The rules blurred through my tears, but I focused on the first line. Do not answer the ward phone after 3 a.m. The phone was still ringing. 3 a.m. exactly, I couldn't answer it. The rule was absolute, and if I couldn't answer the phone, I couldn't accept what the phone was offering. I let my hand fall away from the door release. No, I said, my voice breaking. We don't accept transfers from D. The thing wearing Jace's face stopped smiling. The thing wearing my face closed its eyes. The phone rang one more time, then stopped. For a moment, everything held perfectly still. Then the figure at the door exhaled, a long whistling sound like air escaping a punctured tire. It deflated, literally collapsed in on itself, the scrubs crumpling as though nothing had been inside them. The body on the gurney did the same, flattening into the sheets like a punctured balloon. The gurney stood there. empty except for a pile of fabric and the clipboard, which slid to the floor with a sharp clack. The stairwell door clicked, unlocking from the inside, and swung open a few inches on its own. The gurney rolled backward slowly, pulled by no visible force until it was out of sight around the corner. The door swung shut, the lock engaged with a final solid click. The three of us stood there in the aftermath, breathing hard. The real Jace was white-faced and shaking. Marta's hand was still on my wrist, her grip iron tight. "Good," she said, finally releasing me. You passed." "Passed?" I could barely form words. "That was a test?" "Everything here is a test." She walked to the desk and made a notation in the log, her handwriting as precise as ever despite what we'd just witnessed. "The ward pushes. It finds your pressure points, professional ethics, personal losses, moral obligations, and it pushes until you break." "You didn't break. What would have happened if I'd opened the door?" Marta set down her pen and looked at me with something that might have been respect. "Then whatever was on that gurney would have come inside. And we don't have protocols for getting those things out once they're through the door." Jace sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "It knew my face. It knew how to smile like me." "It's been watching," Marta said simply. "It always is. That's why the mirrors matter. That's why names matter. Every reflection is a study. Every interaction is data." I thought of Anika's words, "Don't feed it counts or names." We'd given it nothing tonight. No numbers, no identities, no entry. The ward had tested me, and I'd chosen survival over every instinct that made me a nurse. I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, scraped out. But I was still here, still standing. Marta stamped my timesheet with the blank seal, the sound loud in the resumed quiet. "You'll do," she said. It wasn't praise. It was a confirmation that I'd met the minimum standard for staying alive, and for now that was enough. 3 weeks after the transfer incident, I'd begun to believe I understood sub-level E's rhythms. I knew the rules. I followed protocols. I'd learned to recognize the warning signs, pressure changes in the air, that particular quality of silence before something went wrong. The way shadows pulled differently when the ward was active. I was wrong to feel confident. The ward was only waiting. It happened on a Thursday during what should have been a routine shift. At 1:47 a.m. the lights flickered. Not the brief stutter I'd seen before, but a sustained dimming. The overhead fluorescence dropping to perhaps 60% power. Then holding there, buzzing with a frequency that made my molars ache. Marta stood immediately. "Count off now." "1," she said. "2," Jace responded. "3," I added. We waited. The lights remained dim. The buzzing continued, a wasp's nest inside the walls. "Keep counting," Marta ordered. "Don't stop until they stabilize." 1, she repeated. 2 from Jace. 3 from me. We went through 3 full rounds before the lights flickered again, brighter this time, strobing twice, then settling back to the dim state. The buzzing changed pitch lower now, almost subsonic. That's when the intercom crackled to life. We didn't have an intercom. I'd never heard it used in 6 weeks of working here. But now it hissed with static, then resolved into a woman's voice, calm, administrative, the same voice from the phone. "All units, respond with current census. Facility-wide count in progress." Marta crossed to the intercom panel, a beige box beside the stairwell door that I'd assumed was dead equipment, and didn't touch it. "Don't respond," she said quietly. The intercom repeated, "All units, respond with current census. This is a mandatory facility count." In the supply room, a printer I'd never heard run before whirred to life. I walked back to check. An ancient dot matrix printer on a metal shelf, connected to nothing I could see, spitting out page after page of perforated paper. I tore off the first sheet. It was blank except for a header stamp. "Wing decensus needed immediately," the printer continued, sheet after sheet of the same message, the paper accordion folding onto the floor. "Marta," I called. She appeared in the doorway, saw the printer, and her expression went flat. "Unplug it." I yanked the power cord. The printer continued running. "It's not plugged in," I said, holding up the cord. The printer kept going, powered by nothing. The dot matrix head screaming back and forth across empty paper. The lights flickered again, brighter, dimmer, brighter, then held at that nauseating reduced level. Down the corridor, doors began unlocking. Not all at once, but in sequence. Click. Click, 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 each lock disengaging in turn, as though something was walking the hallway and opening every door as it passed. "Census night," Marta said. And for the first time since I'd met her, I heard fear in her voice. "It hasn't done this in years. What do we do?" Jace asked. "The protocol." She returned to the nurse's station and pulled out a much older version of the rules, a laminated card, yellowed with age, with text that looked typed on an actual typewriter. "Circle protocol. Everyone to the station." Now Jace and I joined her. She positioned us in a rough circle around the desk, each of us facing outward, able to see a different section of the corridor. "We count," Marta said. "We count the living by presence, not by name. We do not stop counting until the ward releases us." From down the hallway I heard patient K begin his tuneless humming. Then patient M joined, a different pitch, discordant. Other patients emerged from their rooms, drawn by something we couldn't see, and stood in doorways watching us. Annika appeared from the common room, walking with deliberate calm. She took a position outside our circle but near it, adding her presence without joining. "I'll anchor," she said quietly to Marta, who nodded. The intercom crackled again. "All units respond. Census count is mandatory. Provide staff and patient totals." Marta ignored it. She raised her hand and pointed at Jace. "1." Jace pointed at me. 2. I pointed at Marta. 3. Marta pointed back to Jace. 1. We began the loop, refusing to count ourselves, refusing to assign numbers to our identities. Just presence, just positions. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. The ward phone rang. I checked the caller ID without breaking the count rhythm. "Dial 4, I said, continuing. "Marta, 1. The phone rang again. On the tiny LED screen, text scrolled, "Noah Dela Cruz to switchboard. Need head count for incident report, my full name." My exact name, employee format. 2, Jace said, his voice shaking. 3, I forced out, not answering the phone. The ringing changed, not the phone now, but something else. My phone in my pocket vibrating. I pulled it out. Unknown number calling, but the caller ID text read, "Dad, my father had been dead 7 years. His number had been disconnected before the funeral." 1, Marta said, and I heard the strain in her voice. I silenced my phone and kept counting. 2. The mirrors, we'd forgotten the mirrors. The observation windows along the corridor were acting as reflections in the dim light, and now I could see us in them, our circle, counting. But in the reflection, there were 5 people in the circle, not 3. An extra figure between Jace and me, counting along, lips moving a half-beat behind ours. "The mirrors," I said, breaking the count rhythm. "Don't look," Marta snapped. "Keep counting." Presence over image. But the extra reflection moved, turning to face us directly. It was me, another Noah, wearing the same scrubs, the same exhausted expression. But its eyes were wrong, the pupils too large, filling the entire iris. 3, real Jace said. 1, Marta continued. I forced myself to turn away from the reflection and pointed at Marta. 2. The printer in the supply room was screaming now, the dot matrix head moving so fast it sounded like a dental drill. The paper was piling up, spilling into the corridor. I could see the sheets now had words on them. Staff count required, submit names and titles. Census cannot complete without totals. 3, I said, pointing at Jace. The patients in the corridor began counting with us. Patient K. 1. Patient M. 2. Others picking up the rhythm, creating a chorus. 312, 312, but they were counting wrong, counting themselves, using numbers that interfered with our pattern. The rhythm fragmented. Stop, Marta commanded, but not to us, to them. The patients didn't listen. They kept counting, their voices overlapping, creating a cacophony of numbers that made it hard to hear our own count. The corridor changed. I felt it before I saw it, the perspective stretching, the far end of the hallway receding as though the building was expanding. The T-intersection where we stood became the center of a longer space, doors appearing that hadn't been there before. Annika's warning, "If the corridor looks longer than you walked in, don't go the rest of the way." "Turn around and ask someone to say your name, Marta," I said urgently. "Say my name." She understood immediately. "Noah Dela Cruz." "Noah Dela Cruz is here." The corridor stopped stretching. The extra doors faded, translucent, then gone. 1, Marta said. "Resuming." 2, Jace said. 3, I finished. The intercom crackled again. But this time it was my own voice. Noah de la Cruz, this is Noah de la Cruz. I need staff to respond to room 8 for an emergency. Code status confirmation required. Room 8 didn't exist. We only had 7 patient rooms. Jace started to move toward it, the programmed response to a code call, but I grabbed his arm. It's not real. 1, Marta said forcefully, pulling us back to the protocol. The light strobed, 3 quick pulses, then held dim. The reflection in the observation windows multiplied. Now there were 7 figures in the circle, then 9, then too many to count, all of us standing in slightly different positions, counting at slightly different rhythms. The ward phone began ringing continuously, no pause between rings, just a sustained mechanical scream. I remembered Annika's other rule. If you hear your own voice from the nurse's station, check the phone cradle. If it's warm, don't answer again. I reached for the phone, not to answer, but to check. The plastic cradle was hot, almost burning, as though something had been breathing into it for hours. Heating it from within. The phone, I said to Marta, it's warm. 2, she counted, then, cold breaks the line. If the phone won't stop, freeze it. The nourishment room had a small freezer. I grabbed the still ringing phone, receiver, base and all, yanked it from the wall jack and carried it to the freezer. The ringing was so loud it hurt my ears. I shoved it into the freezer beside ice packs and frozen meal trays and slammed the door. The ringing became muffled, a vibration more than sound. Then it stopped. The lights flickered up, down, up, then climbed back toward normal brightness. 3, I said, returning to the circle. 1, Marta continued, her voice steady now. 2, Jace added. We counted. The patients gradually stopped their competing count, falling silent, returning to their rooms. The extra reflections in the observation windows faded, one by one, until only our 3 forms remained, accurate and present. The corridor contracted, the phantom doors disappearing, the far end of the hallway returning to its proper distance. The printer finally stopped. The last sheet of paper drifted to the floor in the sudden silence. We counted 1 more full round, 1, 2, 3, and the lights stabilized completely, returning to their normal harsh fluorescence. The buzzing in the walls ceased. The intercom gave 1 last burst of static, then went silent. When I checked it later, the speaker was dead. The wiring behind it corroded through as though it had been inactive for decades. Our circle held. We'd counted presents without names, refused to respond to the census demands, and given the ward nothing it could use to drag us into whatever space it was trying to open. The patients returned to their routines. The corridor was just a corridor again. The reflection in the observation windows matched reality, perfect and harmless. Marta finally broke the circle. Check the freezer. I opened the nourishment room freezer. The phone sat there, powered down, covered in frost. When I lifted the receiver, it was ice cold and silent. Dead. Leave it, Marta said. We'll dispose of it properly later. She returned to the desk and made careful notations in the log. Census event, 0147-0233. Counting protocol maintained. Phone line severed via cold. No breaches. Ward secured. Then she looked at Jace and me, her expression something close to approval. The ward tried to get longer. It tried to add us to its count. We refused. That's all we can do, refuse and hold the circle. How often does this happen? I asked. Every few years. Sometimes longer. She stamped our timesheets with the blank seal. It tests, we hold, it retreats. The cycle continues. Jace sank into his chair, exhausted. Until when? Marta didn't answer, because there was no answer. There was no endpoint, no resolution, just the endless pattern. Test, hold, retreat. Test, hold, retreat. The ward was hungry, patient, and tireless, and we were the only thing standing between it and everything beyond this corridor. Dawn existed somewhere above us, but in sub-level E it was only a concept. The shift ended at 7 a.m. according to the clock, though time down here felt more like a suggestion than a measurable quantity. After census night, the hours until shift change crawled by in a silence that felt both peaceful and watchful. Marta had me document the incident in the shift log, walking me through the specific language that was used to record what couldn't officially be acknowledged. Facility-initiated census event, I wrote, copying her precise phrasing. Counting protocol implemented per operational guidelines. Communications equipment malfunction. Phone unit removed from service. Environmental anomalies noted and resolved. No staff or patient injuries. It read like any other incident report, bureaucratic and bland. Nothing in the language suggested impossible reflections, corridor expansions, or voices calling from sealed floors. But anyone who worked sub-level E would understand exactly what had happened. Always document, Marta said, reviewing my writing. Not for administration. They don't read these logs. But for the next person. So they know what happened, what worked, what the ward tried. She opened a locked drawer and withdrew the expanded rule packet she'd given me weeks ago. It was thicker now, pages added over the years by different hands. She clicked open a pen and wrote a new entry in the margin. Cold breaks the line. If the phone won't stop, freeze it. Confirmed effective 04/15/2025 census event. My handwriting. She was adding my observation to the permanent record. This is how the rules grow, she explained. Someone tries something, it works, we document it. The next crisis, someone else can use it. She handed me the packet. Add anything you learned tonight. I thought about what Annika had told me, the warnings that had kept me grounded during the worst of it. I added 2 lines. If the corridor extends, have someone speak your full name aloud to anchor your position. During counting protocol, patients may attempt to join. Do not let them interrupt the rhythm. Staff count only. Marta read my additions, nodded, and filed the packet back in the locked drawer. You did well tonight. Most people break the first time they hear their own voice calling. You held. I was terrified, I admitted. Fear's appropriate. It keeps you careful. She stamped my timesheet, that blank seal that meant nothing to payroll but everything to anyone who'd survived a night down here. The ones who stop being afraid are the ones who make mistakes. I glanced at Jace, slumped in his chair by the med cart. After his incident with the mirror weeks ago, he'd been more cautious, more vigilant. But he looked hollowed out now, as though census night had taken something from him that wouldn't grow back. How long can you do this? I asked Marta quietly. How long before it wears you down? She considered the question with the same clinical detachment she applied to everything. Different for everyone. I've been here 14 years. Some last a few months before they transfer out. Some, like Annika, never leave. She met my eyes. The question isn't how long you can do it. It's whether you're willing to do it at all. At 6:30 a.m., the day shift arrived. They looked fresh, well-rested, blissfully unaware of what the night had held. Their shift would be easier. The ward was quieter during daylight hours, or what passed for daylight in the fluorescent consistency of sub-level E. The strange events, the tests, the incursions. Those were night shift problems. We gave report in the usual abbreviated fashion. Patient K stable, medication compliant. Patient A ambulating independently, no distress. Patient M sleeping. Census complete, count is accurate. Nothing about phones in freezers or reflections that multiplied. The day shift nurse nodded, making notes on her carbon copy log, asking no questions. As we prepared to leave, I noticed something. The stairwell door was easier to open than usual. Not physically, but psychologically. As though the ward's grip had loosened fractionally, satisfied or thwarted, willing to let us go. Jace climbed the stairs ahead of me, moving slowly. At the top, before pushing through to the main hospital level, he paused. I can't keep doing this, he said quietly. I waited, giving him space to continue. 10 years I've been down there. I thought I was used to it. Thought I had it figured out. He shook his head. But tonight, when I saw my own face at that door, when I heard myself speaking from the outside, I realized I don't know anything. It can be me. It can be anyone. How do you fight that? You don't fight it, I said, understanding something Marta had been trying to teach me all along. You just refuse it. Follow the rules, hold your ground, and don't give it what it wants. And what does it want? I thought of the census demands, the requests for names and counts, the way it tried to add us to its tally. It wants us to join it, become part of whatever space it occupies. But as long as we stay in the circle, stay in the count, we're here and it's there. Jace nodded, not quite convinced, but accepting the answer, because it was all we had. We pushed through to the main hospital level together. The difference was startling. Clean, bright, normal, the usual chaos of a hospital morning. Physicians making rounds, nurses changing IV bags, families arriving for visiting hours, the institutional smell of coffee and antiseptic. The real world, operating exactly as it should. No one here knew what existed 2 floors below them. No one suspected that something patient and hungry lived in the sealed corridors of a discontinued wing, testing the boundaries, calling through disconnected phone lines, reaching for names it could hold on to. We were the ones who stood between that thing and this oblivious functioning world. We were the circuit breakers, absorbing the surges so they never reached the wider system. It wasn't a job anyone should have to do, but someone had to do it. I checked my phone as I walked to my car. 3 missed calls from Dad. I deleted them without listening to the voicemails. Whatever had called wasn't my father, and I didn't need to hear his voice twisted into shapes that would haunt me. At home, I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes I saw the corridor stretching, extending into impossible distances, and heard my own voice calling from rooms that shouldn't exist. Eventually I gave up and sat at my kitchen table, the expanded rule packet spread in front of me, adding more observations in the margins. Not because Marta had told me to, but because I needed to understand. Needed to document, needed to believe that order could be imposed on chaos if you just wrote down the right combination of words. 3 days later, I returned for my next shift. The ward greeted me with its usual low hum, its frosted observation windows, its nameless efficiency. The phone had been replaced, a different model, newer but already showing signs of wear as though it had been in service for years. Marta handed me my timesheet and a cup of lukewarm coffee. "Quiet night since census," she reported. No incidents, but that would change. It always did. The ward would test again differently, learning from what hadn't worked, probing for new weaknesses. I settled into my chair at the nurse's station and pulled out my index card, creased now, worn soft at the edges from constant handling. The rules that kept us alive. Jace appeared, looking marginally better. "Ready for another one?" he asked, and I heard the dark humor in it, the gallows joke that was the only way to cope. As ready as anyone can be. Marta made the first notation in the log. Night shift commencing. Staff count 3-3, not names, not identities, just presences holding the line. The ward hummed around us, patient and attentive, and we began our work again, the endless cycle of care and vigilance, treatment and refusal, reality and the thing that pressed against it, from the spaces where sub-level D used to be. The rules kept us alive. We would need new rules eventually. The ward would make sure of that. But for tonight, we had enough for tonight, we held. Ruth arrived on a Tuesday, 8 weeks after I'd started. She came through the staffing agency just like I had, young, energetic, with the bright-eyed skepticism of someone who thought they'd seen everything hospital work could offer. Marta introduced us during shift change. "Ruth Castellano, this is Noah de la Cruz. He'll orient you tonight." Ruth shook my hand with the firm grip of someone trying to project confidence. "So this is the mysterious sub-level posting. No computer charting," they said. "Sounds like a dream, honestly. I'm so tired of clicking boxes. I recognized that enthusiasm. I'd had it too once, about 8 weeks in a lifetime ago. It's different down here," I said carefully. "We have specific protocols. It's important you follow them exactly." She laughed. "I'm a rule follower. 3 years in ICU, I learned fast. Do what you're told, document everything, keep your patients alive." "Good philosophy," Marta said, sliding a folded index card across the desk. "Start with this, read it." "Believe it." Ruth unfolded the card and read the 2 typed lines. "Do not answer the ward phone after 3 a.m. Keep the mirrors covered if the lights flicker." She looked up, grinning. "Is this for real? Is this like hazing or—" "It's real," I said. "Everything on that card is real. Everything in the expanded protocols is real." I handed her the thick packet, now even more annotated than when Marta had first given it to me. "Read all of it. Tonight, before anything happens." Her smile faded as she saw our expressions, mine serious, Marta's impassive, Jace's carefully neutral. "Okay," she said slowly. "I'll read it." The day shift departed. The stairwell door closed behind them. The air pressure changed. That familiar drop that signaled we were sealed in for another night. Ruth felt it. I saw her ears react, saw her frown slightly. "Is the ventilation system okay?" "That pressure change, it's normal," Marta said. "You'll get used to it." We walked her through the basics. Medication procedures, patient observation schedules, documentation protocols. Ruth was competent, asked good questions, adapted quickly to the carbon copy charts and handwritten logs. She thought this was just an eccentric unit with outdated systems. She hadn't seen anything yet. At 2:45 a.m., I pulled her aside. In 15 minutes, the ward phone might ring. Do not answer it. I don't care what the caller ID says. I don't care if it sounds like an emergency. Just let it ring. But what if? No exceptions, I said firmly. Let it ring. Marta or I will handle it if necessary. She nodded, uncertain but willing to trust me. At exactly 2:59 a.m., the phone rang. Ruth's hand moved toward it instinctively, that hardwired nurse response to a ringing phone. I stepped in front of her, blocking her path. No, I said quietly. The caller ID read, Internal Extension, 000. Ruth stared at it, her professional instincts warring with my instructions. Someone could be coding. We don't, Marta said from her position at the desk. Watch! The phone rang 4 times, then stopped at 3:03 a.m. Silence rushed back in. Ruth looked shaken. What if that was a real emergency? It wasn't, Jace said, joining us. It never is. Not after 3 a.m. But how do you know? You'll learn, I said, the same way Marta had told me. By doing. Ruth spent the next hour reading the expanded protocol packet, her expression shifting from skepticism to confusion to something approaching unease. She asked questions, practical medical questions that had no medical answers. We did our best to explain the unexplainable. So you're telling me this hospital has a sealed floor that still does things? She said, struggling with the concept. Yes, Marta confirmed, and we're here to keep whatever's down there from coming up here? Essentially, by following rules about phones and mirrors? Yes, Ruth set down the packet. This is insane. Yes, I agreed. It is, but it's also true. And the sooner you accept that, the safer you'll be. She wanted to argue, I could see it in her face. The rational, educated part of her brain was rejecting this reality. But she was smart enough to see that we were serious, that we believed it, and that maybe, just maybe, she should take it seriously too. At 3:30 a.m., we did rounds together. As we passed patient A's room, Annika looked up from her chair in the common room. New nurse, she observed. Ruth Castellano, Ruth introduced herself. Her professionalism automatic. Annika nodded slowly. Learn the rules. Follow them. Don't test them. She met Ruth's eyes. The ward doesn't give second chances. Ruth opened her mouth to respond, but Annika had already returned her attention to the middle distance. Her perpetual vigil resumed. Who is she? Ruth whispered as we continued down the corridor. Someone who used to work here, I said. Someone who learned the hard way. The shift continued quietly. Too quietly, perhaps, but I'd learned not to trust the ward's moods. It had been 3 weeks since census night. It was probably gathering strength for the next test. At 6:01 a.m., as we prepared for shift change, Ruth approached me. I still don't understand all of this, but I'll follow the rules. I'll trust what you're telling me. That's all we ask, I said. Marta handed Ruth a stamped timesheet, the blank seal that marked her as one of us now. You'll work with Noah for the next week. Shadow him. Do exactly what he does. After that, you'll start to develop your own sense of the ward's rhythms. And if I want to transfer out, Marta's expression didn't change. You can request a transfer any time. Most people do eventually, but while you're here, you follow the rules. For your safety and ours. Ruth nodded, tucking the expanded protocol packet into her bag. As I climbed the stairs toward the main hospital level, I heard her behind me, reading the index card one more time, committing it to memory. Another nurse, another set of eyes and hands, another body in the circle. The ward would test her soon. It always tested the new ones, looking for weakness, for gaps in our collective defense. But if she listened, if she learned, if she trusted the rules over her instincts, she might survive. She might even last. The stairwell door closed behind us, and sub-level E sealed itself for the day shift. The constant hum of its attention never quite silent, even when the corridor appeared empty. Somewhere in the spaces between floors, in the sealed wing that used to be sub-level D, something waited. Something patient, something hungry, something that had learned our faces and voices and was slowly, methodically, learning how to use them. We were the ones who stood between it and the world above. We counted ourselves by presence, not by name. We answered phones only during safe hours. We covered mirrors when the lights flickered. We refused transfers from places that shouldn't exist. We held the circle, and we passed the rules forward. Person to person, shift to shift. An unbroken chain of knowledge bought, with fear and near misses and careful notation in the E. Margins of worn papers, the rules kept us alive. The ward kept testing, the circle kept holding for now. 3 nights later, at exactly 2:59 a.m., the ward phone rang. Ruth looked at me, her hand twitching toward the receiver. I shook my head. Don't, she pulled her hand back. We counted together as the phone rang. 1, Marta said, pointing to Jace. 2, Jace said, pointing to me. 3, I said, pointing to Ruth. 4, Ruth said, pointing to Marta. The phone rang through to 3:05 a.m., then stopped. Ruth exhaled shakily. This is really happening. Every night, I confirmed. In one way or another. She nodded, understanding settling into her expression, the way it had settled into mine weeks ago. Not acceptance exactly, but recognition. The acknowledgement that reality down here operated by different rules, and survival meant learning them faster than the ward learned you. The lights flickered once. Without being told, Ruth moved to the nearest observation window and pulled down the white sheet. Covering the glass, she was learning. The circle was holding, and sub-level E hummed on, patient and hungry and endless, waiting for one of us to forget, to make that crucial mistake, to finally give it the opening it had been working toward for decades, but not tonight. Tonight we followed the rules. Tonight, the rules kept us alive, and tomorrow we would begin again.